I was recently looking through the ancient fire records of Mount Koyasan, and I noticed something that felt deeply unsettling. From the year 994 to 1690, the mountain was repeatedly struck by lightning and engulfed in flames, not once or twice, but time and time again in a pattern that feels almost targeted. Now, you might think it's a mountain, altitude invites lightning, but when you compare it to the great Buddhist peaks of China, the math stops making sense. Sites like the Shaolin Temple or Mount Wutai sit at similar or even higher elevations, yet their histories are virtually silent regarding lightning strikes. Their fires were caused by human hands, artillery, arson, or modern electrical leaks. Koyasan, however, exists in a meteorological pressure cooker, where southeasterly Pacific winds collide with northwesterly currents from the Sea of Japan, forcing moisture into an explosive ascent. It is as if the geography itself conspired to create a fortress of storms around Kukai's 1,200-year-old secret. But there is a second invisible storm that is even more striking. For centuries, the Shingon esoteric Buddhism practiced on this mountain was the ultimate intellectual monopoly. It was a complex, secretive system of power where enlightenment was a gated community reserved for the imperial family and the high nobility. The rituals were hidden, the knowledge was weaponized, and the gatekeepers were few. Yet, if you look at Japan today, a startling contradiction emerges. This elite, secretive tradition, the very heart of the Heian state, now accounts for only about 10% of Japanese Buddhists. Meanwhile, nearly 70% of the population follows a completely different path. A popular religion that explicitly rejected everything Koyasan stood for. They traded complex secrets for a single 7-character chant and exchanged the pursuit of perfection for the acceptance of being broken. What caused this massive bottom-up spiritual coup? How did a religion of the 1% become a faith of the masses by admitting that its followers were sinners who couldn't save themselves? To understand why Japan looks the way it does today, we have to look past the lightning-scarred temples of Kuya and into the moment the secret was finally let out.
That really, that frames the entire conflict just perfectly. It's this incredible tension between, like you said, the sky and the earth.
Right.
And also between the intellectual fortress on the mountain and, everyone else down below, locked out.
It has the feel of a prelude to some epic disaster movie, doesn't it? The storms, the secret knowledge, the constant threat of fire. And I think to really get a feel for this, we have to stay on that mountain for a bit. I was really trying to dig into this concept of dialogue with fire that seems so central to Koyasan's history. Mm-hmm. And I stumbled upon this idea of looking at it from the perspective of a master carpenter. Let's say, in the late Heian period, maybe the 11th, 12th century. Imagine being that person.
Okay.
Your whole life, your whole identity is tied to these wooden structures. Your father built parts of this temple complex. Your grandfather probably built the original version. And now you're standing there looking at a pile of smoking, charred timbers because the sky just decided to burn it all down again.
For the third time in your lifetime, maybe.
Exactly. It has to create a fundamentally different psychological and, I guess, spiritual relationship with what you're building and with the divine itself.
It's completely different from what you see elsewhere. There's a volatility to it.
That's the word, volatility.
Right.
Because if you go to China, if you look at Mount Wutai or Mount Imai, those places feel eternal.
They feel permanent. They're built of stone, massive timbers. They have a sense of immovability.
They just sit there. But in Koyasan, the sacred isn't about permanence in that same way. It's about, resilience. It's about this constant cycle of destruction and reconstruction. The carpenter isn't building for 1,000 years.
No, he's building for the next 50 years, maybe. He's building with the full knowledge that this could all go up in smoke again. It becomes this war of attrition against nature itself.
And we have to be really clear that this isn't just, bad luck or a general, it storms in the mountains kind of thing. The meteorology you laid out in the opening is so incredibly specific to this one location.
It really is. I think people hear mountain and wind and they just picture, a nice breezy day on a hike. This is nothing like that.
This is violent.
This is violent on a planetary scale. You've got these two enormous air masses. First, from the southeast, you have the winds coming off the Pacific Ocean. They're warm, they're heavy, and they are completely saturated with moisture, just carrying tons and tons of water vapor.
And they're barreling right towards the Japanese mainland.
Directly toward the Kai Peninsula. At the exact same time, coming down from the northwest, you have these cold, dry, much sharper currents from the Sea of Japan, and they are on a collision course.
And the meeting point is basically right on top of Koyasan.
It's a perfect head-on collision. When these two massive, fundamentally different air masses slam into each other over that specific terrain, the air has absolutely nowhere to go but straight up.
It's forced upwards.
And not just force, but explosively. The steepness of the mountains acts like a ramp. It shoots that warm, moist air vertically so fast that it cools almost instantly, condensing all that water vapor into these huge cumulonimbus clouds.
Thunderheads.
Massive thunderheads. They just park themselves on top of the mountain range like a lid on a pod. It's not a storm passing through. The mountain itself becomes a storm factory.
A lightning generator.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a static electricity factory that's running 24/7, just waiting for the right conditions to discharge. The records show this happening again and again and again for 700 years. The monks weren't just living in a monastery, they were living inside a thundercloud.
I can't even begin to imagine the physical sensation of that. The dampness alone must have been oppressive.
Yeah.
I read this piece by a modern pilgrim, Sam Mao, who wrote about his experience there.
Oh.
And he describes the sensory overload. The cedar trees, some of them 850 years old, so huge they block out the sun even at midday. And the moss on the stones, on the trees, on the statues, everything is covered because it never ever truly dries out.
It's a temperate rainforest environment.
Exactly. He describes the little town of Kusha as sitting in this kind of basin surrounded by 8 peaks like a lotus flower. It's supposed to be a pure land on earth, this perfect, beautiful place.
But there's an underlying menace to it.
A constant menace. The damp isn't just an inconvenience, it's a force of decay. It's rot. And then when it's not rotting, the sky is trying to set it on fire.
And that environmental reality has to completely dictate the terms of your existence. It changes everything. It changes the architecture, it changes the rituals, it changes the psychology.
How so with the architecture?
Well, back in China, at a place like the Shaolin Temple, the threats were almost always human. It was warlords, imperial armies with artillery, arsonists, political intrigue. Those are external human threats.
Right, you build thick walls to keep people out.
You do. But at Koyasan, the primary enemy was the sky. The enemy was nature itself. So the architecture becomes this almost desperate attempt to protect the sacred knowledge, the esoteric secrets inside these wooden boxes that are constantly either trying to decompose from the damp or spontaneously combust from the lightning.
Which brings us to the most incredible irony of the whole situation.
The fire ritual.
The Goma or Homa fire ritual. In a place that is pathologically prone to burning down, their central, most powerful ritual involves making a huge fire. Indoors.
It seems counterintuitive, to say the least.
I've watched videos of this. It's astonishing. You're inside a wood hall. The walls are wood. The ceiling is wood. The floor is probably covered in tami mats. And a monk sits down in the middle of it all and calmly lights a bonfire.
It looks like the biggest building code violation in human history.
It's genuinely terrifying. The flames are leaping up feet into the air, just inches away from these ancient wooden pillars. Why? Given the history, why would you possibly invite the enemy inside?
It's a kind of spiritual homeopathy. You fight fire with fire, but it goes much, much deeper than that. You have to understand the theology of that fire. The Homa isn't just a campfire. It is an incredibly ancient piece of technology.
Technology?
Yes. It traces its lineage all the way back to the Vedic fire sacrifices in ancient India, thousands and thousands of years ago.
So this is pre-Buddhist even?
Long before Buddhism. It connects to Hindu traditions, Saiva Siddhanta. The core idea was that Agni, the god of fire, acts as a messenger. The fire consumes the offering and conveys its essence to the heavens, to the gods.
Okay, so it's a delivery system.
It's a delivery system. And in Shingon esoteric Buddhism, this ancient system was refined and repurposed into a powerful tool for purification. The little wooden sticks that they burn in the fire, they represent human defilements.
Like greed, anger.
Greed, anger, ignorance, jealousy, all the obstacles that prevent you from achieving enlightenment. So by burning the sticks, you are physically, literally incinerating your own sins.
But it wasn't just for personal development, right?
Yeah.
It had a more practical, worldly application.
Oh, absolutely. It was high-tech magic for the state. The rituals were used for santika, which is a Sanskrit term that means averting danger. This could be an earthquake, a plague, or an enemy army.
So it's a defensive weapon.
It's a defensive weapon. And in the ultimate paradox, it was also used for controlling rain.
Wait. They used fire to control rain, the very thing that was causing the thunderstorms.
That's the logic. The belief was that by mastering the elemental force of fire through this precise, controlled ritual, you could then exert a kind of dominance over the other chaotic elements outside.
You're asserting order.
You're asserting order in a world of chaos. I can control this fire right here in this room, therefore I can influence the storm raging out there. It's a profound statement about their worldview.
They weren't just passive victims of nature.
Not at all. They saw themselves as active participants in a cosmic struggle, and they believed they possessed the technology, the spiritual technology, to manipulate the forces of the universe, to hack the weather, essentially.
That word technology keeps coming up. It's so interesting because we tend to think of religion in terms of faith or belief or devotion, but you're describing something that sounds more like spiritual engineering.
Within the context of esoteric Buddhism, which is called Mikkyo in Japanese, it was absolutely engineering. It was a precise system of cause and effect.
If X, then Y.
Exactly. If you perform the ritual with absolute precision, if you hold the mudra, the symbolic hand gesture, at the exact angle, and you chant the mantra with the perfectly correct Sanskrit pronunciation, and you visualize the mandala in your mind's eye with total clarity, you will get the desired result. It's not a matter of hope. It's a matter of execution.
It sounds like entering a complex password into a computer system.
A heavily encrypted one. And that brings us right to the heart of this intellectual monopoly that was mentioned in the opening. This was not open source software. This was the most proprietary technology imaginable.
Gated content. In modern terms.
It's the ultimate gated community. The word Mikkyo literally translates to secret teachings. But it's not secret just for the sake of being mysterious. It's secret because it's considered far too powerful and, frankly, too dangerous for the uninitiated.
Dangerous how? Like you could hurt yourself.
You could hurt yourself or you could hurt the state. Think about it. If you truly believe this ritual can protect the emperor, can bring rain to end a drought, or can destroy an enemy fleet, would you want that instruction manual just lying around for anyone to pick up?
No, of course not. That's classified. That's a state secret.
It's a state secret, and access was controlled through a ritual called Abhisheka. It's an initiation, a consecration, where a master literally pours water on the student's head to transmit the teaching lineage. Without that direct transmission, the texts are useless.
So you could steal the scrolls.
You could steal the scrolls, but you wouldn't have the key to decrypt them. You can't run the program without the oral instructions and the ritual initiation from a living master.
It's like having a piece of software, but no license key to activate it. It's basically digital rights management for the 9th century.
That's a perfect analogy. And acquiring that license key was, for centuries, one of the most difficult and perilous undertakings in the world. The sources describe the path of esoteric Buddhism as the difficult path. And they are not exaggerating.
What made it so difficult?
Well, for starters, it required a high degree of literacy, not just in Japanese, but in classical Chinese, which was the scholarly language, and often in Sanskrit for the mantras.
And what was the literacy rate in, say, 9th century Japan?
Probably less than 1%. So right away, you've disqualified 99% of the population. Then you needed the time and resources. You needed to spend years studying with a master, hours a day in meditation and ritual practice.
Which a farmer or a fisherman just doesn't have.
No, this was a full-time job. It was a religion for the aristocracy, for the court nobility, for the 1%. It was the ultimate luxury good.
And the cost to even import this product into Japan was astronomical.
It's a story that sounds like an action movie. We have to talk about how this knowledge actually got there. It wasn't just Kukai. He was building on a tradition of these incredibly brave monks traveling between Tang China and Japan.
Right. I was reading about the monk Vajrabodhi. His journey is just mind-blowing. We're talking about small wooden sailing ships trying to cross the East China Sea.
Which is one of the most treacherous stretches of water in the world, prone to typhoons, unpredictable currents.
The sources are so vivid. They say Vajrabodhi set out with a fleet of 30 ships. 30. All of them loaded with precious cargo sutras, commentaries, statues, intricate ritual implements, the entire hardware package for this religion.
And almost immediately they sail into a massive storm. A typhoon?
The text even mentions things like poisonous sea serpents and whales. I'm not sure if we should take that literally, but...
Well, imagine being on the deck of a small wooden boat in the middle of a typhoon. 40-foot waves are crashing over you. The wind is howling. In the chaos, you see a giant squid's tentacle, or the back of a huge whale breaching. To a terrified 8th century monk, those are sea monsters. The ocean was a realm of demons and chaos.
Just the sound of it, the wood of the ship groaning and screaming, the sails being ripped to shreds, and you're down below clutching these bundles of paper scrolls because they're worth more than gold, more than your own life.
And you just watch as, one by one, the other ships in your fleet are swallowed by the waves. They just disappear into the storm.
30 ships left port. How many made it to China?
1. Only Vajrabodhi's ship survived the journey.
A 97% failure rate. That's just staggering.
It is, but you have to think about the economics of that scarcity. When you lose 29 ships worth of treasures and only one small collection of texts makes it through, what does that do to the value of those surviving texts?
They become priceless. They're relics.
They are more than priceless. They are invested with the power of that survival. When Kukai finally brings the completed system of Shingon back to Japan, the imperial court views these teachings as a matter of supreme national security. This isn't just a personal path to enlightenment.
This is state protection Buddhism.
Precisely. The Tang dynasty in China had used these same rituals to protect their empire. The Heian court in Japan wanted that same power. They wanted a spiritual defense shield.
So the emperor in Kyoto is looking up at Mount Koyasan, and he sees those monks not just as holy men, but as his spiritual missile defense system.
That's exactly what it was. And the cosmology of the system was perfectly suited to an imperial court, especially the concept of the mandala.
Explain that. The mandala is more than just a pretty picture, right?
Oh, much more. It's a schematic of the universe. It's a cosmic blueprint. And at the absolute center of the main Shingon mandalas is the Sun Buddha, Mahavairakana, or Denichi Nyorai in Japanese.
The Great Sun.
The Great Sun Buddha. He is the source of all reality, all light, all existence. Everything in the universe emanates from him. And who is his representative on Earth?
The emperor.
The emperor. So the mandala provides this perfect top-down hierarchical model of the universe that just so happens to mirror the political structure of the state perfectly. Denichi at the center, the emperor just below him, then the court nobles, and then everyone else at the bottom.
It's a divine justification for the existing power structure.
It's the ultimate justification. Everything is neat, ordered, and under the control of the initiated few. So you have this perfect system. The physical fortress of storms on the mountain protects the intellectual fortress of secret teachings, which in turn protects the emperor and the state. It seems completely unbreakable.
It seems that way.
But systems that are that rigid, that hierarchical, are also incredibly brittle. And when the ground beneath them starts to shake, they don't bend, they shatter.
And in the late 12th century, the ground in Japan didn't just shake, it completely gave way.
Yes. The end of the Heian period and the start of the Kamakura period, the Genpei War. The aristocracy loses its grip on power, and the samurai, the warrior class, takes over.
But this was more than just a political change, right? It was a societal collapse.
It was a complete tearing of the social fabric. Decades of civil war, widespread famine, plagues, massive earthquakes, fires that repeatedly destroyed the capital in Kyoto. The records from that time describe bodies just piling up in the streets.
And this is the context for that idea of Mapo.
Exactly. Mapo, the latter day of the law.
It sounds like the title of a post-apocalyptic movie, The End of Days.
And for the people living through it, it felt that way. The theological idea was that history unfolds in 3 stages. First, there was the age of the true Dharma, right after the historical Buddha, when people had the capacity to understand his teachings and get enlightened.
Okay.
Then came the age of the semblance Dharma, where the teachings were still there, but people's ability to practice them was declining. And then finally came Mapo, the age of degeneration.
And the idea here is that the religion itself has degraded.
Not the religion, but the people. The belief was that human beings in the age of Mapo were simply too corrupt, their minds too filled with passions, their lives too full of suffering to ever successfully practice the difficult path of Koyasan.
So let's put ourselves in the shoes of a common person in this era. A foot soldier, a farmer, a mother who has lost her children to plague. I look up at that mountain, at Koyasan. What am I thinking?
You're thinking you are completely, utterly doomed.
Chuckles. Okay. Blunt.
But true. You look up at that mountain fortress and you think, I can't read. I certainly can't read Sanskrit. I don't have money to pay for an initiation. My job might involve killing people or animals, which creates terrible karma. I am definitely going to one of the Buddhist hells.
The intellectual monopoly didn't just offer a path for the elite, it implicitly confirmed that there was no path for anyone else.
It created a massive crisis of spiritual anxiety. A profound crisis. And it's precisely at this moment of maximum despair that the spiritual coup happens. This is when the lock on the fortress is finally broken.
And this is where the Pure Land teachers come in. People like Honen and his student, Shinran.
The great rebels, the great reformers, they looked at this whole situation, the impossible complexity of the old path and the profound suffering of the people, and they proposed a radical diagnosis.
Which was?
The problem isn't that you aren't trying hard enough. The problem is that the path itself is no longer viable in this age. They completely shifted the paradigm from jiriki, which means self-power,
to Tariki, other power.
Exactly.
Okay, let's really unpack this because it's a huge conceptual leap. Jiriki, self-power, that's the Koyasan model. It makes intuitive sense to a modern person. I study, I meditate, I perform the rituals, I put in the work, and I achieve enlightenment. It's a meritocracy.
You pull yourself up by your own spiritual bootstraps.
Right. It feels earned. But Tariki, other power. On the surface, it sounds like giving up. It sounds like I can't do it myself, so you do it for me.
And that's essentially what it is. It starts with a radical act of self-assessment. It says, I am a bamboo, a foolish, ignorant being. My mind is a whirlwind of blind passions, greed, anger, ego. I cannot possibly purify myself through my own efforts.
Why not?
Because even the effort to purify myself will be tainted by my ego. I'll start getting arrogant about how much I'm meditating, how pure I'm becoming, which is just another form of defilement.
So you're trapped. Any action you take just digs the hole deeper.
You're completely trapped. So the only way out is to stop digging, to completely give up on your own power, admit that you're drowning, and reach out for a hand.
And whose hand is that?
It's the hand of Amitabha Buddha, or Amitabutsu in Japanese, the Buddha of infinite light. The core of the teaching is that eons and eons ago, when he was still a bodhisattva, Amida made a series of vows. And the most important one, the primal vow, was that he would not accept final enlightenment for himself unless he could create a system whereby any being in any age who sincerely called out his name could be saved and brought to his Pure Land.
So he's the cosmic lifeguard.
He's the lifeguard who has already built the boat, thrown out the life preserver, and is pulling you in. Your only job is to stop struggling and let him save you.
And the work then shifts from the complex fire rituals and meditations to just the chant.
Just the Nembutsu, the recitation of the phrase Namu Amida Butsu, which means I take refuge in Amitabha Buddha.
7 syllables in the Japanese pronunciation.
That's it. No years of study, no secret initiations, no bonfires in the middle of the room.
Just that phrase. But this is where it gets really subtle and where we see the crucial difference between the two main Pure Land schools that emerged. Because even something as simple as chanting can become a trap for the ego.
How could that be a trap? It seems so simple.
Well, the first great teacher, Honen, advocated for frequent recitation. He said you should say the Nembutsu as often as possible. Thousands, even tens of thousands of times a day. It was a practice. You were actively building a connection to Amida. Okay, that still sounds a bit like work, though. I chanted 10,000 times today, so I've earned my place in the Pure Land. It still feels like there's an element of me doing something.
You've put your finger on the exact problem. If you are chanting in order to earn salvation, aren't you right back in the trap of self-power? You're just using the chant as a tool for your own ego to feel accomplished.
Look at me, I'm such a great chanter. I'm definitely more saved than that guy who only chanted 5,000 times.
Precisely. And it was Honen's student, Shinran, who saw this subtle trap and took the logic to its most radical, most explosive conclusion. He said, you don't chant in order to be saved.
Okay.
You chant because you are already saved.
Wait, can you say that again? If I'm already saved, what's the point of chanting at all?
It's an expression of pure gratitude. It's the spontaneous, joyful cry of a child who knows their parent is there. It's not a transaction, it's a reaction. But then Shinran goes even one step further. He says that even the desire to say the name, that very impulse in your mind, does not originate with you. It is Amida's compassion working through you.
So I have literally zero agency in my own salvation.
Zero. None. It is 100% other power. It is the ultimate act of surrender. And this leads to that mind-bending paradox you mentioned in the intro, the sinner paradox.
Yes, the quote from Shinran. If even a good person can be saved, how much more so a wicked person? I have to admit, every time I hear that, it just sounds wrong. It sounds backwards. It feels like a get-out-of-jail-free card for terrible behavior. Hey, I'm a wicked person, so I get to cut the line into heaven.
It seems that way, doesn't it?
Yes.
It was profoundly shocking in the 13th century, and it's still shocking now. But you have to follow Shinran's logic to its conclusion. Let's define the terms. Who is the good person in this equation?
Well, it's the monk on Mount Kuja, the person who follows the precepts, who studies, who meditates diligently.
Exactly. And what is that good person ultimately relying on?
His own effort.
His self-power. His self-power. And because he is so confident in his own goodness and his own efforts, he is, in a very subtle way, telling Amitabha Buddha, thanks, but no thanks, I've got this on my own.
Ah, he's closing the door to grace because he thinks he doesn't need it.
He's holding up the umbrella of his own pride, and it's blocking the light of Amitabha's compassion. But now consider the wicked person, the hunter, the prostitute, the illiterate peasant who knows they've broken the precepts. They have no illusions about their own goodness.
They know they're a mess.
They know they're a mess. They have no hope in their own power. They have no spiritual umbrella to hold up. They are standing completely naked and helpless in the rain of compassion.
So it's their very recognition of their own helplessness that makes them the perfect recipient for help.
Exactly. They are the perfect vessel for other power precisely because they are empty of the pride of self-power. This teaching didn't just tolerate the broken, it centered them. It said to the common person, your brokenness, your sinfulness is not a disqualification, it is your primary qualification for salvation.
That's actually a profoundly moving idea. It completely inverts the entire spiritual hierarchy. The person at the very top of the holy mountain is, in a sense, the furthest away from salvation, and the person in the mud at the bottom is the closest.
It was a revolution, a complete spiritual coup d'etat. It democratized enlightenment entirely. You no longer needed the lightning-scarred temple fortress. You carried the Pure Land in your heart and on your lips every single time you said Namu Amida Butsu.
And this has to be the reason for those incredible statistics we started with. The 70% of Japanese Buddhists who follow some form of this Pure Land path versus the 10% who follow the esoteric traditions. This new product, if you want to call it that, just had an infinitely better product market fit for the masses.
It was scalable. Esoteric Buddhism, by its very nature, does not scale. It requires a one-to-one transmission from master to disciple. It's artisanal. Pure Land is infinitely scalable. You can teach it to an entire village in an afternoon.
So that explains its success in Japan. But I want to zoom out and ask a comparative question. Buddhism originates in India. And by the time this is all happening in Japan, 12th, 13th centuries, Buddhism in India is, for all intents and purposes, dying out. Why did this kind of popular devotional Buddhism explode in East Asia but completely vanish in its homeland?
That is one of the great questions in the sociology of religion, and there are a few key factors. The primary mistake that Buddhism made in India was that it stayed in the ivory tower.
It stayed on the mountain, so to speak.
It stayed on its own version of the mountain. In this case, it was the great monastic universities, the Mahaviharas like Nalanda or Vikramashila. These were incredible centers of learning with thousands of scholars debating the finest points of logic and metaphysics. But they became increasingly disconnected from the day-to-day spiritual lives of ordinary people in the villages.
They became an intellectual monopoly.
A total intellectual monopoly. They lost their grassroots support. And at the same time, Hinduism was undergoing its own popular revolution, the Bhakti movement.
And what was Bhakti?
Bhakti was, in many ways, very similar to Pure Land. It emphasized intense, emotional, personal devotion to a specific deity like Krishna or Shiva. It offered that direct, accessible, emotional connection that the masses craved and that the Buddhist monasteries were no longer providing.
So the people found an alternative.
They did. So when the Turkic invasions happened in the 12th century and these great Buddhist universities were sacked and burned to the ground,
There's nothing left. The head was cut off, and there was nobody to grow a new one.
the roots had already withered away. But in Japan and China, Buddhism did something much, much smarter. It practiced syncretism.
The old if you can't beat 'em, join 'em strategy.
Pretty much. It didn't arrive and try to erase the native religious landscape. It merged with it. In Japan's case, it merged with the indigenous Shinto tradition.
Right. This is where the local gods, the kami, become protectors of Buddhism.
Exactly. They recontextualized the entire pantheon. Instead of saying, your local mountain god is a false idol, they said, your local mountain god is actually a manifestation, a local appearance of one of our cosmic Buddhas or bodhisattvas. This is the doctrine of Honji Suijaku.
So the great Shinto sun goddess, Amaterasu, for example.
Becomes identified with the sun Buddha, Mahavairocana. It's a brilliant strategic move. It honors the local culture while introducing a new, more sophisticated philosophical framework. It dramatically lowers the barrier to entry.
But there was one specific area where Pure Land really outcompeted every other form of Buddhism in Japan, and it's a bit of a morbid one.
Death.
Death was the killer app.
In the marketplace of religion, it absolutely was. Think about it from the perspective of a layperson. Zen Buddhism is wonderful for developing discipline and mindfulness. Esoteric Buddhism is great for elaborate rituals and state protection. But what do you say to a grieving mother whose child has just died from a fever?
Meditate on the inherent emptiness of all phenomena is probably not going to be very comforting.
It's cold comfort. The self you thought your child had was just an illusion is philosophically profound, but emotionally devastating at a funeral. But Pure Land has a very different answer.
Which is?
Pure Land says, your child has been reborn in the Western paradise, the Pure Land of Amitabha. It is a land made of jewels, where music plays constantly, where there is no sickness, no aging, and no death. And if you hold fast to the Nembutsu, you will go there too and be reunited with them.
It gives you a clear destination, a specific address for the afterlife.
It gives you a concrete hope. It addresses the fundamental human crisis of meaning that death represents in a way that abstract philosophy simply can't. And because of this, Pure Land became, and largely remains, the funeral religion of Japan. It won the hearts of the people because it knew how to comfort them in their darkest hour.
So to recap, it's like a perfect storm. The geography created the constant threat of destruction. The politics of the Heian court created the need for an elite secret religion. And then the societal collapse of the Kamakura period created this immense well of suffering that only a simple, accessible promise of heaven could fill.
And that popular need proved to be far more powerful and enduring than any secret kept in a fortress on a mountain.
It's an amazing arc. But I want to bring this into the present day. Does this historical split still define the landscape? You have the 10% in the esoteric camp and the 70% in the Pure Land camp. Do they just exist in separate worlds?
They do, but there are fascinating points of intersection. And the way modern people interact with these ancient spaces is really telling. You mentioned that writer Sam Mao who visited Koyasan.
Yes, that story from his article really stuck with me because it feels so contemporary. Here he is, a modern secular person, taking his family on a pilgrimage to Koyasan. He's seeking a profound, mystical, quiet experience.
He wants to experience the secret for himself.
He wants the full experience, but he has a baby with him. And as anyone who's ever traveled with an infant knows, babies have absolutely no respect for your spiritual agenda.
Babies are the ultimate teachers of non-attachment to outcomes.
He hilariously calls the trip heaven or Heian, with Heian being short for heinous, depending on the baby's mood.
I can relate to that.
So he's in the Okinoan Cemetery, which is this incredibly sacred, ancient, deeply atmospheric place with over 200,000 tombs, and the baby just starts wailing. A full-blown meltdown, and he's mortified. He feels like he's desecrating this holy site, ruining the contemplative vibe for everyone. He feels like a failed pilgrim.
He's caught in the trap of self-power. I must control this situation. I must perform pilgrimage correctly.
Exactly. He's trying to perfect his experience. But then his guide asks him this very simple question. She says, "Do you know the shape of your mind?"
A very classic Zen-like question.
And before he can answer, she says, "It's the shape of the moon. It looks round and bright, but it changes every day. Sometimes it's full, sometimes it's just a sliver, sometimes you can't see it at all." And in that moment, he has this realization that his struggle, the screaming baby, his own frustration, the complete imperfection of the moment, that is the practice. That's the shape of his mind today.
That's a beautiful synthesis. He's standing in the heartland of esoteric, difficult path Buddhism, but he's having a quintessentially Pure Land, other power realization. He's accepting his own foolishness, his lack of control.
It's a perfect example of how these ancient traditions can still function as powerful meaning-making machines for us. We may not fear lightning in the same way, but we certainly fear our own inadequacies, our failures as parents, our inability to live up to our own ideals.
And just as modern people are finding new meaning in the old esoteric sites, the Pure Land tradition itself is evolving in a really interesting way. It's moving beyond just being a religion about the afterlife.
How so?
There's a major intellectual movement, especially in places like Taiwan, with figures like Master Shingon of Dharma Drum Mountain, to reinterpret the goal. It's a movement called Building a Pure Land on Earth.
Pure Land on Earth. That sounds like a contradiction in terms. I thought the entire point was to escape this imperfect Earth and go to the perfect Pure Land.
Historically, yes. It was often very escapist. The world was seen as a burning house, and the goal was to get out. But modern reformers looked at that and saw a problem. They argued it could lead to social passivity. If you're just focused on your ticket to heaven, you might not care about fixing the problems of the world right here.
You let the house burn.
You let the house burn. So they flipped the core teaching. There's a famous phrase, if the mind is pure, the land is pure. They argue that the Pure Land isn't just a physical destination you go to after you die. It's a state of being you can help create right here, right now, through compassionate action.
So it becomes a motivation for social and environmental activism.
Exactly. It shifts the focus from personal salvation, get me out of here, to social transformation, let's fix this place. The Nembutsu chant is no longer just a ticket to the afterlife. It becomes the fuel for bodhisattva action in the world.
That's an incredible evolution. From an elite secret on a stormy mountain, to a simple chant for a suffering peasant, to a call for social justice for a modern activist.
And meanwhile, what has become of the old Mikkyo, the esoteric tradition in the popular imagination today?
For chuckles. Well, if you watch any anime or read any manga,
you know the answer.
It's become magic. It's the hand signs that ninjas make in shows like Naruto. Those are directly lifted from the mudras of Shingon Buddhism, aren't they?
They are. The so-called 9-syllable seals that you see in pop culture ninjutsu are direct copies of esoteric ritual gestures. The tradition has been reframed as the occult.
The cool, mysterious, magical side of Buddhism.
Right. It's a bit of a simplification of its deep philosophy, of course, but it speaks to the enduring power of its aesthetic. The secret that was once guarded by lightning and perilous sea voyages is now a trope in global pop culture.
It's incredible. The intellectual monopoly wasn't just broken by Shinran and the Pure Land teachers. It was ultimately broken by pop culture.
In a way, yes. The secret got out.
We've covered such a huge expanse of time and thought today. From the physics of colliding air masses over a peninsula to the deepest questions of faith and helplessness in the human heart.
At its core, it's a story about how humans adapt their deepest beliefs to survive in the world they find themselves in.
I keep coming back to those three images. The master carpenter staring at the ashes of his life's work. The monk Vajrabodhi on that single surviving ship in the storm. And the Kamakura period peasant standing in a muddy field chanting a single name. They're all grappling with the same fundamental reality.
Helplessness.
Utter helplessness in the face of forces far greater than themselves.
That is the core human condition, isn't it? We are small creatures on a big, powerful, and often very scary planet.
And sometimes the weather is just really, really bad.
Yes, the weather is often very bad.
So after all of this, what's the ultimate takeaway? Why does this 800-year-old theological shift in Japan matter to someone listening to this today?
I think it all comes down to a single powerful concept, interdependence. That radical shift from self-power to other power wasn't just an act of theological laziness. It was a profound and I think deeply accurate recognition of reality.
How so?
In the modern West, we are obsessed with the myth of the self-made individual. I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. I am the master of my fate.
Right. It's the default operating system.
It is. But the entire history we've just discussed suggests that the self-made person is the ultimate illusion. You didn't create the language you think with. You didn't create the ecosystem that provides your food and air. You didn't create the body you inhabit. We are, from beginning to end, radically dependent on other power, whether you choose to call that nature or society or history or Amitabha Buddha.
So admitting that we need help isn't a sign of weakness.
It's the beginning of wisdom. It's the beginning of true resilience. The fortress of storms reminds us we can't ultimately control nature. The failure of the difficult path for the masses reminds us we can't perfect ourselves in a vacuum. We are all interconnected. We all need help.
We tend to think of progress as things getting more complex. More data, more technology, more secrets. But the history of Buddhism in East Asia suggests the opposite. The greatest innovation wasn't the complex mandala hidden in a mountain fortress. It was the realization that the ultimate truth might be simple enough for anyone to hold. It makes you wonder. In our own age of information overload and gated knowledge, are we waiting for a new kind of simplicity to break the monopoly again? Perhaps the next great revolution isn't about learning more, but about admitting how much we need help.